Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Megan Rogers, a director at Clifton Hoffman Attorneys and also the head of the oil and gas sector. It is my great pleasure to welcome you today to part 2 of our oil and gas webinar series for this week. In today's session, we spotlight South Africa, the South African oil and gas sector, and more particularly, we aim to highlight some of the strategic features of the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill. We will hear from the government regulator, the Petroleum Agency, as well as industry participants, as the country gears toward an entirely new legislative regime in relation to hydrocarbon exploration and production. Before I introduce our panel, just a reminder, attendees, to please list any questions you may have for the panel members in the chat box function. I'll then put it to the panel members during our interactive session, and you have our best endeavors to get to as many of your questions within the time allocation. So now turning to our panel, I once again have the privilege today of facilitating a very accomplished panel. We have with us Ms. Sibongile Mali, who was recently appointed as the Manager of Licensing and Regulation at the Petroleum Agency. Sibongile is responsible for assessing and processing petroleum exploration and production rights, as well as permits, and of course what will now become the new petroleum agreements ultimately under the bill. And she has extensive experience in the minerals and upstream petroleum sectors, having served 17 years with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, 6 of those years in the capacity of Director of Legislative Drafting, which ultimately saw Sibongile involved in the drafting of the MPRDA Amendment Act in 2008, as well as the MPRDA Amendment Bill of 2013, and of course, the current petroleum bill, which we have under discussion today. Then our second panelist is Ms. Amor Carstens. She's an associate in the corporate and commercial and oil and gas sector at Clifton Hoffman Attorneys. Amor holds a BCom law degree and LLB degree and has worked closely with international oil companies, national oil companies, as well as government regulatory authorities on early stage exploration projects, as well as gas development projects in both South Africa and Namibia. Our next panelist is Ms. Zakiri Zama. She is the General Manager of Imbokodo Exploration and Production, an emerging and locally grown oil and gas company in South Africa. Zakiri has well over 30 years of experience in both the public and private sector, having served more than 15 years in various leadership roles in the extractive industry sector. Her previous roles include Government Affairs Manager of ExxonMobil Exploration and Production South Africa, Stakeholder Relations Manager at the Minerals Council South Africa, and Regional Corporate Affairs Manager for Tronox South Africa. Zakiri is also currently a member of the Ministerial Advisory Council for the energy sector, serving on the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Strategy Committee, which reports directly to Minister Mantashe. Our fourth and final panelist is Mr. Cohen Rana. Cohen holds a BSc Chemical Engineering and is a professional engineer registered with the Engineering Council of South Africa. He attended the Wits Business School, the Gordon Institute of Business Science, and London Business School UK, in attaining his executive education. Cohen has well over 26 years of experience in the minerals, mining, and oil and gas exploration and production sector, with experience in both Southern and East Africa. He is a founding director and also the chief executive of gas E&P company Sunbird Energy, which is looking to bring Block 2A offshore South Africa to first gas. He is also the chief executive of Umbono Energy Partners, a renewables company working on a strategic energy partnership transition between upstream oil and gas and green renewable energy. So a warm welcome to our very esteemed panel members. Before I hand over to them, perhaps to provide some context to our topic today. So South Africa's primary energy source remains coal. We all know this. Coal currently constitutes around 70%, 77% plus of the energy supply, followed by crude oil imports at 21.6%, renewables and waste at 7.6%, and gas at 2.8%. Gas in particular is viewed as a transitional fuel or power source to South Africa's low carbon future. So the development of gas infrastructure we see across a number of integral government development plans and initiatives, such as the Integrated Resource Plan, as well as the National Development Plan. And in addition to this, the President's Economic Restructuring and Recovery Plan sets out that the development of the upstream oil and gas sector is an integral part of economic reconstruction and recovery post-COVID-19. So there's a clear path and a clear government agenda and initiatives and support for the development of gas within the jurisdiction. Of course, currently South Africa's oil and gas acreage is occupied by both onshore and offshore by a mix of independent oil companies, major oil and gas companies, as well as the national oil company, PetroSA. And we stand at the forefront of an exciting period in the development and production of particularly gas and condensates, both onshore and offshore South Africa, all of which could positively impact the economy, the South African economy, and its rebound. With that, with that being the landscape, the latter part of 2019 brought with it a series of legislative developments for the upstream oil and gas sector. The most notable was the publication of the Petroleum Bill on the 24th of December 2019. As many of you know in this industry, we frequently receive little pre-Christmas gifts from the drafting committees. So just before Christmas 2019, we received the first draft of the Petroleum Bill. And that's essentially what we're here to discuss today. So without any further delay or elaboration on my part, I'm happy to hand over to our first panelist, Ms. Sibongile Mali of the Petroleum Agency, who will take us through the strategic focus of the bill from a Petroleum Agency perspective, as well as the well-anticipated question in terms that most of us have as industry stakeholders. Can we have a status update? Ms. Mali, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Megan, for the nice introduction. I will be taking you through the status update and some strategic focus of the bill. I think we all by now know that the bill is now before Parliament, and the agency has been working together with the department. We've been with the department throughout the development process. It is a department's process, as government is the developer of policy and legislation, but the agency as the regulator plays a very crucial role in terms of then assisting government with the development. The whole process eventually saw the bill introduced in Parliament early this year, and I'm sure that we were all relieved when that happened. At least now the bill is in Parliament. The State Law Advisor had tagged the bill as a Section 76, which means that it's a bill that affects provinces. It will be taken through the NCOP process. So the Parliamentary Joint Tagging Mechanism Committee also confirmed it as a Section 76. So it is a Section 76. It will be going through the provinces, and those timeframes are governed in terms of the joint rules of Parliament and the NCOP rules. But the bill at some stage was referred to the National House of Traditional Enquiries and Leaders by the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy. And I think I know that they had until the 18th of October to submit their comments. So the agency, together with the departments, now that the bill is in Parliament, our role would be then to support Parliament as they take the people of South Africa and investors through the process of the finalizing the bill, and we will also be assisting the department and the NCOP when the bill is referred to the National Council of Provinces. In terms of the strategic objectives or strategic focus of the bill, we, as the agency, as I've said, that our role has mainly been to support government. We believe that this bill provides legislative and regulatory certainty. I mean, the regulation or the management of the upstream petroleum resources had for a very long time been just a Chapter 6 under the MPRDA, and to a certain extent, those provisions were mostly geared towards mining, and some of the provisions that are more crucial or critical for the development of the upstream petroleum industry were not sufficiently addressed. So the separation of the upstream provisions from the mineral resources, from the mineral provisions, we see it as a big step towards providing that legislative and regulatory certainty. We also believe that this bill, once it is promulgated, I mean, we've gone through the provisions, even with the state law advisor, that we believe that they're implementable and enforceable. And as such, it assures our investors that there is a sound and competitive upstream petroleum framework in place in South Africa. And that should be assuring to investors that your investments will be protected. We also believe that the bill, amongst others, reflects the imperative to accelerate exploration. Our industry, compared to the other major jurisdictions or the more developed jurisdictions in terms of petroleum development, it's still very, very new. So we can only move towards production if we accelerate exploration. And we believe that one of the issues that are sufficiently addressed in terms of the bill is the acceleration of exploration. The bill also ensures that the industry is inclusive. It provides for state participation. There's participation by Black persons. We know that there were some concerns as we were working with the department on the bill regarding the Black persons' participation. We've tried to address same. The bill also provides for economic transformation in general, and this is done through your skills provisions relating to skills development, local employment, and also the local sourcing of goods and services. The biggest provision or principle that is entrenched in terms of the bill, we believe that it is the security of tenure, because as an investor, when you come or when you make a decision to come and invest in a country, you need to know that your investment is protected and that you will be able to monetize your investment. And we believe that this bill does that. If I may just indicate two provisions that relates to that, is the transitional provisions that have been provided in terms of the bill relating to the protection or the process relating to existing rights that have already been granted or within the system by the time the bill is enacted as a law. So the bill provides for those provisions on how then those rights will be protected or how they will transition to the new act. The whole intention is that where there is a need to transition, there must be sufficient time or period afforded to the right holder to be able to transition to the new system. There is also, to add to that, the bill proposes a petroleum right. So instead of you applying or investors applying for an exploration right and not being sure whether you will be granted a production right, so the bill now proposes that there is one right, which is a petroleum right. Of course, there is provision for approvals to move to stages, to phases. So if when we are done with the exploration phase, there is a provision that you must then apply to the agency for provision to move to a production phase. But your investments in that way is you are assured that you have your petroleum right. We also believe that these provisions are then therefore sufficient for us, or they go a long way in ensuring that a conducive environment is created for investment and the growth of this industry, while it also contributes to job creation. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to indicate that as the agency, we support government process of reviewing the upstream petroleum industry framework. This is not just the only regulatory document which is being reviewed. I'm sure that everybody's awaiting at some stage the release of the fiscal regime, the review of the fiscal regime, which National Treasury will announce when the time is good and when they are ready. But we support the process of reviewing both the Petroleum Resource Development Bill and the fiscal framework. And we also support the confirmation by the bill of the agency of the regulator. And by doing that, we are preparing ourselves as the agency to implement the bill. We are doing that by identifying the resources and classifying the blocks that by the time the bill is out there, because the bill calls for a system where minister will invite applications. So we need to have then at that time identified and classified those blocks. So we're preparing ourselves for that. We are also preparing ourselves and identifying other resources which might be required to either be capital resources or human resources which will be required. I mean, we all know that the bill also seems to put the health and safety in requirements on the agency. So obviously we need to prepare ourselves as the agency for that mandate. We also believe that this legislative framework will ensure that there is fair revenue sharing between investors and the people of South Africa. The people of South Africa, they will get their fair share through taxes and the legislative framework or relating to fiscals, which will be put forward. Local employment and the local sourcing of goods and services, investors will be able to monetize their investment, and there is also stability which is provided in terms of the bill. And obviously the enforceable provisions of the bill also provides a security of tenure or protection to our investors. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Sibongile. It certainly seems as though the Petroleum Agency has identified quite a number of areas that needs focus from an administrative perspective, and from a legal perspective. We see the designation of certain blocks. We see the Petroleum Right being introduced, and we recognize that that necessarily requires the Petroleum Agency to work out some form of an implementation plan to being able to actually implement those provisions under the bill, simply put. So I know that there has been, quite a bit of staffing up from Petroleum Agency's perspective, and you've grown your teams quite significantly. Is that all part of you gearing towards readying yourself really for the upstream bill? Have you found that there are quite a few administrative tasks which need to be fulfilled by the Petroleum Agency in order to reach readiness?
Thank you, Megan. Yes, we actually do have a team within the agency that is looking at, the agency's readiness to implement the bill. We know that it can be as things are now, because there are quite a few changes that are being brought forward by the bill, and the agency needs to be in a position to implement the bill. We can't be, at the time the bill is enacted into law, only then we are starting to, run around and trying to. So we are preparing as now we are in the process to identify and classify blocks. That process has been going on for a while. We are now also have started the process of identifying other resources that might be required. As I indicated to you, the bill also seems to suggest that we will be responsible for the health and safety. So clearly we need also to capacitate the agency in terms of how we will be able then to implement that mandate.
Thank you so much, Sibongile. Then turning to our next panelists, Samo Carstens, who will do a deep dive on some of the provisions which Sibongile mentioned. Welcome, Amo, into the new regulatory provisions currently proposed under the bill. Over to you, Amo.
Thank you, Megan. Sorry, just getting my slides up. Okay, here we go. So thank you, Megan, and thank you, Sibongile, for your presentation. So, as Sibongile has mentioned, the bill has been tagged as a Section 76 bill, and I will be quickly giving you a brief overview of what this parliamentary process entails. So the tagging of the bill as a Section 76 bill means that the bill has been presented to the National Assembly as an ordinary bill affecting the provinces. It was introduced in the National Assembly on 1 July, as Sibongile stated, and even though it was introduced in the National Assembly, it has to be considered by the National Council of Provinces as well. The bill is then referred to the relevant portfolio committee in the National Assembly, who will consider the bill and may either agree on the current draft, propose amendments thereto, or reject the bill. In some instances, the portfolio committee may initiate a public participation process, but it should be noted that the election of a public participation process is just that. It's an election of the National Assembly. We do, however, anticipate that a public participation process will take place, but that decision rests in the hands of the National Assembly. After receipt of comments, and if so elected, the public participation process, the second reading of the bill will take place before the National Assembly, where the bill will be debated, and after that, it will be voted on. If there is a majority vote in favor of the bill is referred to the National Council of Provinces. If the National Council of Provinces has no amendments to the bill and accepts the bill in its current form, the bill is referred to the President for his assent and signature. If not, the National Assembly also has the election to initiate a public participation hearing. However, after the National Assembly has proposed its amendments, the bill is referred back to the National Assembly, and the National Assembly can either accept the NCOP's amendments or can override it by a two-thirds majority vote. The President then has the option to refer the bill to the Constitutional Court for a decision on its constitutionality, should he have any concerns in this regard. However, on the presidential signature, the bill will be promulgated into law. Now turning to the petroleum permits and petroleum rights. As a starting point, it should be noted that technical cooperation permits will no longer be granted under the Upstream bill. Sibongile did mention security of tenure, and in this regard, the current holders of technical cooperation permits will have the exclusive right to apply for petroleum rights over the area covering the TCP. The granting of reconnaissance permits remains, which permit may be granted over an existing rights or permits. The reconnaissance permit will be valid for 2 years, but remains non-renewable. A new permit is introduced under the provisions of the bill, namely the retention permit. A retention permit is granted in instances where development and production of petroleum is not possible due to unfavorable market or economic conditions. The retention permit would essentially suspend the terms and conditions of the petroleum right so as to allow the holder to wait for a shift in adverse market conditions prior to making an investment decision. A retention permit will be valid for a 3-year period and renewable for a further 3 years. Then, of course, a significant amendment to the Upstream bill is the introduction of the Petroleum Right. A petroleum right will replace the granting of separate exploration and production rights. Instead, applicants will be granted the petroleum right governing the key terms of both the exploration and production phase. The duration of the exploration and production phases will vary according to the activities of the holder. You will note from the summary, the duration for the production phase remains 30 years, which will be renewable for an unlimited amount of terms, each of 10 years. The exploration phase, however, will depend on the location and status of the acreage. If the acreage is onshore or offshore but in shallow waters, being less than 200 meters in water depth, the exploration phase will comprise of an initial term of 3 years, renewable for a further 3 terms of 2 years each. This means that for onshore and offshore exploration in shallow waters, the exploration phase will be for a period of 9 years. For frontier acreage or offshore deep water acreage, the initial exploration phase will be a term of 5 years, renewable for 3 terms of 3 years each. This totals the exploration phase for frontier acreage or offshore in deep waters to a total of 14 years during the exploration phase. This, of course, being a welcome amendment when having regard to the nature of exploration activities. Next, I'll be discussing the amendments relating to the acquisition of petroleum permits and the petroleum right. In its current form, the Upstream bill ultimately proposes 2 methods for the acquisition of petroleum permits or the petroleum right, namely applications by invitation and unsolicited applications. The applications by invitation method is then can then be subdivided into a further 2 methods, namely competitive administrative licensing rounds or open licensing rounds. You'll see from the slide that Section 13 of the bill proposes that the Minister may, on recommendation by the Petroleum Agency, initiate a competitive administrative licensing round or an open licensing round by publication of such invitation in the Government Gazette. Under the provisions regulating competitive administrative licensing rounds, the Minister may invite applications for petroleum right or a reconnaissance permit in respect of a specific block or specific blocks, including those blocks reserved for Black persons, as defined in the bill. The invitation will prescribe the period within which potential applicants have to lodge their applications with the Petroleum Agency. The invitation must also be accompanied by licensing round guidelines, which guidelines will set out, amongst other things, the minimum work commitment for the initial term, the projected long-term exploration work commitment, and the basic terms and conditions on which such applications may be granted or refused. Each application submitted pursuant to a competitive administrative licensing round will be assessed, and the application which will ultimately be successful is the one which proves to be the most competitive. Under the open licensing rounds, the Minister similarly initiates the process by publishing a notice in the Government Gazette. The difference here being, of course, that there will be no predefined criteria in the invitation published by the Minister, and the applications will be dealt with on a first-come, first-served basis. In relation to unsolicited applications, applications for reconnaissance permits can be submitted at any time without the need for the Minister to publish an invitation. the partnership and participation processes essentially proposed by the bill. The Upstream bill, apologies. In terms of Section 31, every petroleum right must have a minimum of 10% Black participation. For purposes of a Section 31 participation level, companies who are 51% Black owned will meet the criteria. The 10% participation interest may be diluted by the Black owned oil company to as low as 5% in aid of capital raising. JV partners can, however, apply to the Petroleum Agency for a 2-year extension to comply with this Black participation criteria. As regards Section 32 participation, the Minister may, by publication in the Government Gazette, as explained earlier, reserve certain blocks for BEE participation. In this instance, only companies who are 100% owned will qualify to apply for the reserve blocks, of course subject to the criteria set out in the Government Gazette. The current form of the bill provides for a state participation of 20% carried state participation. However, in this draft, provision is made for the holder or holders of a petroleum right to recover the costs associated with the carry. In this regard, the bill proposes that a maximum of 50% of the state's proportionate share of exploration costs and up to 100% of the state's proportionate share of production costs may be recovered from the state share of productional revenue. The cost recovery rules are prescribed in the regulations and to the extent necessary may be further amplified in the terms and conditions of the Upstream of the Petroleum Right. Last, but definitely not least, is the government fiscal terms currently in the bill. You will recall that under the 2019 iteration of the bill, reference was made to production bonuses, petroleum rent tax, and royalties. In the updated iteration of the bill, these references have been removed, which we did not find unusual since these matters fall within the domain of the Minister of Finance and National Treasury. As Sibongile confirmed, the fiscal provisions relating to the upstream sector will therefore be spearheaded by the National Treasury and the Minister of Finance. We do anticipate a consultative process to follow on these specific terms. Thanks, Megan. Over to you.
Thank you, Amor. Before you jump off and leave us, just on this particular slide and your slide where you demonstrated what the process would be for the upstream bill, we anticipate that the money bill will follow a fairly similar process. Would you be able to indicate to us is it a Section 76 money bill parliamentary process? And how this runs in parallel to the Section 76 money bill?
Sure, Megan.
Petroleum bill process.
Sure. So a money bill is actually a Section 77 bill and follows the same process as an ordinary bill that doesn't affect the provinces. So quite different from the process I just explained in terms of Section 76. The money bill will be introduced in the National Assembly, and if passed by the National Assembly, it will be referred to the National Council of Provinces. Each delegate in the National Council of Provinces will vote individually, and the bill must be passed by the majority of delegates present. If the NCOP, however, rejects the bill or proposes its amendments, the bill will be returned to the National Assembly, and essentially, the National Assembly has the authority to either take into consideration the NCOP's amendments, or they don't have to. So the National Assembly can pass the bill. The National Assembly can pass the bill without taking into account the NCOP's vote, which is quite different from the current process that the upstream bill will take.
Thank you very much for that. And you mentioned just one last point on that, that under the actual sections, public participation is stated as as optional. But we have in South Africa a tradition of ensuring that there is public participation in these bills. So from an investor perspective, I assume investors would be quite concerned about, you know, that the fact that the legislative provisions don't tie up with, you know, what is traditionally the practice. But we have a firm practice of public participation, right, on both Section 75 and Section 76 bills.
That is correct, Megan. Bills of this nature, especially bills affecting the provinces, are generally referred to for public participation.
Thank you so much, Amal.
Thanks, Megan.
Then turning to our next speaker, I mean, thank you, Amal, for that presentation. I think one of the points which comes across quite clearly, Zakiri, turning over to you, is that the bill aims to create a home for emerging oil and gas companies. There's clearly a home within the bill. And as you go through your presentation and you share that with us today, perhaps if you can share your views on whether you believe the bill actually promotes foreign investment in our country and enables local companies to raise capital. These are essentially, you know, the two balancing interests in the context of the bill. And have we achieved that, given we all recognize that this is the capital intensive nature of hydrocarbon exploration and development? Have we achieved that balance in the bill where we're promoting foreign investment and enabling local companies to raise capital? Your views on that appreciated. Zakiri, over to you.
Thank you very much, Megan, and a very good afternoon to all webinar participants. It is my pleasure to spend this afternoon with you. And thank you to the first two speakers as well. I think they've outlined the provisions of the bill quite well. Maybe to start, the separation of oil and gas from mining is commendable. Oil and gas is quite distinct and it requires its own legislative framework. I think the department and the ministry have done well in that, and would like to believe that the separation shows commitment to regulatory certainty, which hopefully will translate into investor confidence. And without a doubt, should these resources be commercially viable, it would be an economic game changer for the country because of the parallel industries that will benefit from the industry. The industries services sector will also benefit, as well as employment opportunities in the industry or the other parallel industries that will benefit. Now, on the legal certainty and stability, it's covered by Section 44(4)(a) of the bill. Both Amo and Sibongile have touched on the new term that has been introduced, that of the Petroleum Right, which allows the state and the right holder to negotiate terms of both the exploration and production phase. This speaks to the security of tenure for both for the right holder, and I think investors will find it commendable that there is that ability to negotiate the terms from early on, instead of the production right being negotiated later on in the process. The third issue that I wanted to touch on is that of state participation, which has been set at 20% carried interest. This provision was expected as well. I mean, similar to other oil and gas producing jurisdictions, there is state participation. Obviously, the modalities change, the rate of participation, as well recoveries that changes for each jurisdiction.
but it was well expected. The cost recoveries are set at 50% for exploration and then 100% production of the state's proportionate share of costs. And I think as the industry, maybe we still have a little bit of negotiation with the minister on this aspect, but the principle itself, it is expected. But importantly, the participation of the state, it ensures that South Africans benefit from hydrocarbon in endowment. And I think ordinary South Africans will also appreciate that the minister has put in this provision. The other key aspect, Megan and fellow webinar participants, is that of the third-party access to upstream petroleum infrastructure. The provision should be welcomed because it optimizes the industry's performance towards sustainable development. Although the practicalities are not as simple as one would imagine, but the rights of all the stakeholders should be taken into consideration when the third-party access is being negotiated by respective stakeholders. In the bill, it stated that PASA may direct that infrastructure be used by the third parties if warranted by consideration of effective petroleum operations. The provision, again, can only promote collaboration and efficiencies, which will benefit shareholders and improve environmental performance of the industry and also enhance societal acceptance. I remember that during Pagisa days, there were a lot of issues that were raised around environmental performance of the industry. So this is one area as well that could improve how we perform as an industry if we were to share some of the infrastructure that exists instead of building new infrastructure. The other area is that of local content, the promotion of transformation. Sibongile did outline quite a bit on this aspect of local content, which is quite important. The organization that I represent, obviously it's majority Black-owned, 51% Black-owned. So we do welcome the mandatory 10% Black participation on commercial terms, as articulated in section 31(1), as well as there is section 32 A and B. I'm not going to go into the detail of that. Amo has just spoken extensively around that. But the other issue is that of the barriers of entry, which are high. Obviously, so we do welcome the conducive legislative environment that the ministry is putting into place to ensure that local companies and Black companies in particular can be able to participate in the industry. Additionally, for the purposes of raising capital, Black companies are allowed to dilute to more than 5%, not more than 5%. And that is the 5% of the 10% HDSA interest in IOC blocks. We found that to be quite a positive aspect. And obviously, it's important to note that this aspect of dilution would have to be incorporated in JOAs at the time, in order to align with the prevailing legislation when it is passed. Some JOAs you might find that they do not allow such percentages for interest. And as a matter of inclusivity, Sibongile did dive into this issue again. Section 107.1 provides for the ministerial prerogative to develop regulations regarding transformation, which specifically covers the elements of preferential procurement, employment equity, as well as human resources development. I think that is another key aspect that will ensure that ordinary people can participate in the industry. Again, if you refer to Project Palisa, the issues of local content were discussed at length, and it's important that the industry is seen as inclusive, and there is a component of local content that is strong in the industry. Again, local content is a industry terminology, and it's quite common in all jurisdictions, in that local people have got to participate and benefit in the extraction and exploitation of the resources. The other issue that I wanted to mention, Megan, is that of the fiscal terms. Again, the two speakers have covered the issue of the fiscal terms, but just maybe to remind the fellow participants in that in this year's budget vote, the Minister of Finance then announced that it was working on oil and gas fiscal terms. The industry obviously is hoping that those terms will be fair, and a parallel process to the UPRDA will ensue, so that when the consultations in Parliament are taking place, there is a sort of an informed decision for the investors to know that what the fiscal terms would look like. Maybe in closing, just to comment on the process that Amo has just alluded to, in that well, we are anticipating that there might be public participation processes to support the bill. And in my experience from the MPRDA days, it is a long process. And I think as the industry, we need to pace ourselves in that the process is going to be long when all stakeholders participate and in the bill, whether it's in Parliament or it's in the 9 provinces. And it becomes quite a difficult process for all stakeholders involved. I mean, the investors, the government, the communities, everyone, because you don't want a situation where there are stakeholders that might say they were not consulted, or maybe the process was not followed to the T. So it is going to be a even tougher process as we maneuver the bill through government processes. And I think we should all participate the best way we can, so that we avoid the bill being challenged in whatever way, and make sure that when the bill gets passed by Parliament and the President signs it into law, it's a piece of legislation that we can all say we did make contributions, and in some areas we did not get it our way, but it should be a process that we all participate towards. In a nutshell, Megan, I think the bill is balanced. It does give comfort to the investors, and for emerging oil and gas companies, local companies, I think it does give that balance, and the government has tried to put conducive terms to enable companies like ours to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zakiri. We have a few questions for you, but I think I'll pass that over to the panel session, and then put that out to you then. Thank you very much for that insightful discussion. We will jump straight into Mr. Cohen Runner. And really, while Cohen sets up his presentation of areas, Cohen, from a general perspective, it seems oil and gas companies are certainly facing a number of complex questions at the moment. We have a changing energy economy. It seems there's no single storyline about the role of gas in the energy transition. And then you combine that with our change in legislative landscape in South Africa. I'd imagine it's quite a bit to digest from an Umbono as well as Sunbird Energy perspective and to gear for. So quite keen to hear from you as to how you've balanced all of these factors and these changing and complex landscapes at the moment. Over to you.
Thank you, Megan. I actually can't see my screen right now. Can you see my slides at least?
Yes, you are. You're up and running on the first screen.
Let me just see if I... Well, maybe if I could ask Karusha to present on my behalf, because I can't see my presentation slides.
Sure, I'll get them up now.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Karusha. Good afternoon to all the participants and good afternoon to my fellow panelists. And thanks so much, Megan, for the opportunity to participate. So what I thought I might do quickly is just maybe share a little bit of where Umbono might fit into this whole landscape and for us to realize that we have such a strong, vested interest in this, right? The bill is absolutely critical to us and what we do. So Umbono is 100% black owned. We've been around for over 20 years in the natural resources and energy sector. We have a long-term mineral and oil and gas sector focus through our affiliate companies. We created Sunbird Energy that is attempting to bring first gas on Block 2A, about half TCF of gas, that I think is going to play a crucial role in, every day we're reading about the load shedding and we're experiencing it and we're reading about the diesel and reading about this and that and all the rest. So I think clearly that domestic oil and gas has a crucial role to play in what we're doing. Along with that, we speak about transition, so we're involved in renewable energy as well. We have about 250 megawatt under contract at the moment, and we're also extremely busy with battery mineral exploration at the moment. That forms a part of this transition, both in South Africa and in Madagascar. And our key focus at the moment is nickel for those batteries that Elon Musk is so keen on. Next slide, please. Karishka. Excellent, thank you. So talking about transition then, with Umbono being active in both the mining as well as the mineral and oil and gas exploration and production sectors, I think we've got some helpful and useful perspectives and insights that are serving us quite well. And that we think we can contribute to the conversation, right? I mean, the global clean, green energy transition it's going to take time. This is one thing we need to understand. Things take time. It's going to need funding engines. We don't just arrive to where we want to be with our 2050 goals, etc. It's going to take time. It's going to need funding. And then secondly, I think we're going to need transition fuels, right? So that's going to be extremely important in the process. So having said all of that, the upstream oil and gas and mineral exploration success, right, could serve as the transition funding mechanism, and gas alongside that as a vital transition fuel, supporting and enabling renewables and battery technologies. I think that's going to be such an important part of this whole story. Hence, the new Upstream Petroleum Resources and Development Bill that we're discussing today is a pretty consequential piece of legislation for South Africa, I think. So with that sort of backdrop, I wanted to just share a few thoughts. The previous speakers have covered so well all the details of the bill. If you go to the next slide, Karishka. just a few thoughts on what, as an emerging oil and gas E&P company, which parts of the bill we really find encouraging and really supportive for the environment, right? So there are a number of aspects to the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Bill that we find encouraging. One, active state and black person participation in the development of the nation's petroleum resources. When this is done correctly, we've seen it around the world, right? From the 1970s, we've seen state participation just come rolling in, particularly amongst the OPEC countries, and how what a role that has played in those particular sectors and in those nations in terms of their development, right? So when we do this right, and this is what we really need to aim to do in South Africa. When we do this right, state participation and local participation, the direct financial benefits can foster the much needed economic growth that we need, local and state learning, growth, capacity building, technology transfer, etc., enhanced collaboration over the stewardship of the nation's resources. And this, again, in terms of how the bill is currently structured, it directly supports the emergence of local, capable oil and gas companies, like my company and like Zakiri's company, right? So this we find very appealing in the bill. There are some things that I call the success criteria, right? Number one, obviously, we're looking for exploration and appraisal success. That's the bottom line. Yeah, if we don't have the geology and we don't have the success on the exploration and appraisal side, all of this is going to be academic. But having the right framework is what is going to assist in getting the success, right? And we hope the geology is there, which we believe it is. I mean, a second success criteria are clear, quick, consistent rules and processes. That's going to be a consistent theme, I think, and that's what as participants in the industry and investors, we generally constantly looking for clear, quick, consistent rules and processes, and then we just get on with it. Next slide, Karishka. The state participation is on a carried interest basis and not on a free equity basis, right? We think this is pretty significant, and that's quite encouraging. It could have come out a little differently. It's not upfront paid equity, but it is definitely much more commercial than free equity. And with the cost recovery of the carried interest being legislated and being allowed, I think that then creates the right environment. I think even though there's a carried interest, it's the right environment in order to encourage the investment. A key success criteria, right, for the carried equity interest would be the cost recovery mechanisms, which are in the legislation right now, the draft legislation, which is great. The cost recovery mechanisms, again, need to be clear, consistent, commercial, and that's what we're anticipating out of the regulations to come. Black person participation, a third point that we find encouraging, is not designated or assigned. In other words, you can't simply, as an IOC, appoint your favorite black, right? In that, or the government cannot appoint their favorite black, so to speak. So the IOCs are free to run their own partnering processes and select their most suitable partners. I think this is essential because there's a free market that's prevailing. You can run a competitive process, and some of the success criteria that I would encourage IOCs to follow is one, pick partners that match your values, right? Be clear about that. I mean, all of these international companies have very clear objectives, very clear values around what they want to achieve and what their brand represents, etc. My encouragement would be pick partners that match your values. Pick partners that have a long-term view, right? Pick partners that have both the commercial as well as the technical competence in oil and gas, because this is going to be essential for both recognizing opportunities, but also understanding risk, right? Because we all know that we're in this game, it's a long-term game, and there's risks associated with it, but we're in it because there is the potential for the opportunity and the potential for the reward if you've got the patience for it, right? PIC partners, they have the ability to raise the required capital if given the opportunity and the support. And I would strongly encourage IOCs with this particular provision of the Act, resist the temptation for fronting. That's just really a bad idea. Serves nobody, it won't serve you, it won't serve the nation, it certainly doesn't serve the people of South Africa, right? So just avoid that. Next slide. So we quite like the blocks reserved for Black persons, right? I think that's a powerful tool to facilitate more rapid emergence of capable Black-owned oil and gas companies like ourselves and Zakiri's company. I think it fast tracks the local company / IOC partnering on technology, expertise, experience, and the necessary funding. In this process, the key success criteria, I think, one of which would be a robust, efficient invitation system with outcomes based on the quality of the applicant and the meeting of objective criteria. Again, so even though this is a process of facilitation, we think if the process is robust, we get the best outcome for both the development of the resource, for the nation, for the emergence of the emerging oil companies like ourselves, etc., etc. So that's another key theme there, right? Number 5, again, this was mentioned by Zakiri, the Black person dilution provisions of the Act and the once empowered, always empowered. We think this is helpful. Number 1, it helps with the funding. You know, some of the earlier discussions, it was problematic as to how one would go about funding the participation of the Black organizations. Now, with this adjustment in the draft bill, we think this is a great step forward to facilitate the much needed funding, and we've seen models of how this works, right? And it works well. The once empowered, always empowered, contentious, right? Extremely contentious, but I think it was the right move, a bold move, but the right move on behalf of the government and the drafters. Why? Because I think it brings certainty for the IOCs. It definitely brings certainty that you're not having to constantly wonder, are we compliant or not compliant, and what becomes, do you know what I mean? So I think it brings a certainty, but it's also helpful to the Black partners, in that companies, emerging companies, want to grow and potentially invest in other opportunities. And if you don't have an ability to actually be able to do that and redeploy capital, you end up wondering, okay, how, is this the best way of structuring this? So we quite like that in that, and we think it's going to bring a lot of certainty for both the IOC as well as the Black partners. Again, success criteria, clear rules, and efficient application of those rules when it comes to that particular element. Next slide. The next point, this has been mentioned as well, the prescribed local content plan. I'm very passionate about this. And when you are structured and clear thinking about this, we are likely to have better, more successful outcomes with intentional local content plans and goals, positive economic growth, impact of local procurements, local recruitment, skills development, training. So we quite like this, that this is specifically articulated in the Act. Success criteria, again, clear, realistic, well-developed, well-structured regulations established through close industry collaboration. And Spongile, I suspect you and I are going to be speaking a lot about this through the association as well, because this is one of the areas that I'd love to spend time championing in that. So having this being clear, well-structured through a collaborative process will result, we believe, in more sustainable outcomes. My next slide is something that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from. It's a success story out of Nigeria, a company called First Exploration and Petroleum Development, the First Exploration and Development Company Limited, First E&P. An amazing company, really, really an amazing company that just inspires me, to get up in the morning, even though this industry, I've been around this industry a very long time, and it's really hard, right? It's really hard. But it's companies like these that really get you inspired, get you going to say, well, yeah, if we stick at it, you get there. They were founded in 2011. Right, they acquired a 10% interest in in what is called the Oil Mining License 34 in Nigeria. It was effectively a 4.5% working interest in the actual block itself. So 10%, 4.5%, not too dissimilar to the 10% provision here in the current bill. They partnered with the Dangote Group. The strategic funding came in there. Eventually, they marched on in 2013 to actually being the winning bidder for Chevron's 40% interest in the license area, the lease areas 83 and 85. 2014, another strategic investment, which is interesting. 2015, fascinating and so encouraging. They then become an operator, a proper operator in their own right of the NNPC JV with themselves. 2018, recognized as the most compliant Nigerian content. I like that, the Nigerian content. In that there's just such a nationalistic pride about that, the Nigerian content, and that's what we're trying to achieve, right? That the growth and development of local emerging players in this context. 2018 took FID, which is no small matter. I know about that sort of thing. It is a big task and not easy to achieve. We haven't achieved one yet, right? So it took FID on the development of the Anyala and Madu fields on the lease areas 83 and 85. 2019, this is also quite significant. So they started out as a Nigerian company, but in 2019, they were putting in bids outside of Nigeria, right, in Ghana, and were successful. 2020, first oil on the Anyala field. 2020 again, commissioned the FPSO, Abigail Joseph. 2021, achieved first oil exports. Now they're up to plateau production of 40,000 barrels per day. I mean, that really is, I think, an amazing case study. I think they're going to be presenting at the Africa Oil Week in Dubai this week. So I think they're a great company. Obviously, the caveat with all of this is Nigeria is much more mature and advanced. A lot more exploration has been done, a lot more discoveries have been made. There's flowing production. South Africa, we still considered a frontier. But the point is, this kind of thing is possible when we are intentional, right? The other thing that stands out is that from 2011 to 2021 is 10 years, right? It takes time. So in this industry, it's going to take time. My last slide, Karishka, I'll pause here, is as Sunbird, our Sunbird company, we own the block 2A, and we're really hoping that we see, ultimately, it's taken time, a long time, we're needing to be patient, but with the production right that we have in place from the regulator, we're hoping that we can be producing first gas soon and contribute to the energy story in South Africa. So let me pause there. Thank you, Karishka. You can turn that off. Thank you, Megan. That's all I wanted to say on my slides. I promise to be quick.
Thank you so much, Cohen. That was quite an exciting and quite detailed discussion. Really enjoyed it. Happy for all of the panel members to switch over their cameras in the next few minutes for our panel session. And we do. Fantastic. So, Cohen, if you can switch on your camera as well.
Oh, my camera's on.
It is on, Megan.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. So, off the back of Cohen's session, I mean, some of the key points you made, Cohen, was that sort of, you know, we see the principle in the upstream bill, and the principle is contained. It now falls to implementation and administration, such as with those bid rounds. You know, how will they be administered, and what will the criteria be? And we must ensure that we apply a criteria that is essentially fair and, you know, transparent, and that we get aggressive bids, even in an all-black owned oil company bid round. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. So I think that brings us to exactly the point I made to Sibongile about gearing the Petroleum Agency gearing administratively, because it certainly seems, Sibongile, that the Petroleum Agency has an extensive role under the new bill, far more extensive than it had under the MPRDA. And I think the comfort that the industry will get as you develop your guidelines and issue that to the industry. Is that something that you're looking at doing once the bill is issued, or at least signed off by the president? What can we expect to see in those moments after the bill has been signed? Perhaps to fast forward to that point. Sibongile, have we?
Megan, I think Sibongile is battling to having a bit of connection issues.
Okay, I see it's unmuted. Sibongile, can you hear us? No? Okay. So maybe we'll pause that question for Sibongile and then move into the questions that I have for Cohen and Zakiri, or for our prelim questions. The first question that we have is, in securing investment and competing for foreign investment in hydrocarbon exploration and production, and this remains a priority for many African states, the competition for foreign investment, particularly in South Africa, as you correctly mentioned, Cohen, which is a nascent, new, budding jurisdiction. It requires foreign investment in order to move from exploration into production. It requires the drilling of wells, the investment in seismic. Have we done enough, is the question, under the Upstream bill, to remain competitive and as a destination of choice for early stage exploration from a regional perspective? And this is really looking at our neighbors over in Namibia, neighbors over in Mozambique. Have we done enough? What's the general sense?
That's a great question, Megan. I mean, there's always this difficult balancing act for the government between national objectives and imperatives for the versus the aspirations of local E&P companies and wanting to be involved, and then the expectations of IOCs in terms of wanting a competitive environment that's attractive. Regulators generally want more, industry generally wants less, right? So that's the tension that you're constantly dealing with. I think I also understand how we may have arrived at the sort of the 30% mark in the bill when you look at how the mining industry emerged over time. I think we're somewhere between 26 and 30%. Now thereabouts. So I see how that sort of landed there, and the discussion was, okay, how can it be less? I mean, I sort of get that politically. But what is unique in the Upstream bill now is the fact that 10 of that 30 is commercial. It's just a commercial, and people need to come in, involve themselves, raise the capital. It's a commercial interest, and so that is I think a little unique. So it's really the 20% that you're discussing. You say, well, is that good? Is it bad? And we can make comparisons around the world and see what's what other jurisdictions are doing. My experience from the mining industry is that what is even more important now is to get the bill in place, get the bill enacted, get the rules clear. And from the mining industry, generally mining companies just get on with it. Just get it done. It's not even a conversation anymore. You just see deals get done, 26% deals, 30% deals. It just gets done. Mines get built for as long as the rules are clear and the regulator is keeping things moving forward.
Thank you, Cohen. Over to you, Zakiri.
Thanks, Megan. I think, in my view, the bill is quite balanced. Although we are aware that the past few years we've seen very few private equities and maybe some of the international oil companies participating in exploration. However, I'm of the view that the sooner we can confirm the commerciality of some of the finds or recent finds, then maybe we can start seeing capital moving into our jurisdiction. But if you look at the bill overall, it's very much balanced, and it has the aspects that you would find in any of the other oil and gas producing regions. I think what keeps us on the back foot as South Africa is the fact that we are not necessarily known as an oil and gas jurisdiction. But as I said earlier, that if we can confirm some of the resources that have been discovered, if they are commercially viable, I think that might be a game changer for us. I haven't attended the conference currently taking place at the ICC, but I saw one of the tweets from the department that the minister announced some funding mechanism. I think local companies will have to follow that quite closely and see if we can't raise funding in the region to complement the funding that comes from elsewhere in the West.
Thank you, Zakiri. Sibongile, are you back with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, Megan, I'm sorry about that. I can hear you now.
No, fantastic. We were just wrapping up on a question which relates to whether or not we were being competitive from a regional perspective in terms of our upstream laws. I mean, comparing with investment, or moving that investment from Namibia to South Africa and competing for that small pool of investors. Are we being competitive enough in the upstream bowl to attract investors to South Africa, to the sector? And I think you would have been involved in some of the studies that were done, or you would have probably led some of those studies, those jurisdictional studies. Would be quite keen to hear from you in terms of as part of your drafting committee duties, when you did those studies on other jurisdictions, what your overall sense was. Were we being competitive as South Africa?
Thank you, Megan. So we believe that the provisions that are being put forward are quite balanced. They are competitive. We've done so the bill as it is was benchmarked by the department and the agency. We visited quite a number of countries, both in Africa and international. And we believe that because we've also benchmarked with Nigeria. We've benchmarked with Angola. I can't remember which other countries in Africa we've benchmarked. So we believe that in terms of competitiveness, the provisions that are before Parliament as they are now, they are quite still attractive, and investors would be able to monetize their investments, and there's some attraction to the industry. And I mean, that coupled with the recent developments that have been happening in terms of exploration activities, we believe that we are on the right track as the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibongile. And then the earlier question which I asked Sibongile was if you had a sense for us in terms of, so once we've gone through the bill process and assuming all things are even and all things work out well, the president is happy, signs off on the bill. From a petroleum agency's perspective, I mean, what would your next steps be? What would your immediate next steps be? Would you be issuing sort of guideline to the industry? What can we expect, looking into a bit of a glass ball at this moment?
So the intention, obviously, is that once we're not going to wait for the bill to be promulgated and assented to, we obviously are going to be preparing guidelines so that we document step by step of what will happen on, for example, applications for open invitation and applications that are going to be on a first come, first served basis. So where possible, we will be developing internal guidelines on how the agency will respond to, when we receive an application, or the processes that will be followed going forward. So I think because then that will simplify the process for everyone and ensure that it's also understandable by everyone on how the whole thing will unveil itself. And like just assume that everyone understands what is there in terms of the law, and because otherwise then we stand a chance of not being able to do any work at all. We'll be getting inquiries left, right, and center. So it's easier to prepare guidelines and maybe just put them on our website or something. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sibongile. Do we have any questions in the chat at the moment? Karishka, the audience being quite quiet. Everybody must be happy with the presentation.
Yeah, no questions.
And the timelines, and that's quite good. And then I think one of the other prelim questions which we had is also to Cohen and Zakiri in terms of are you ready for transitioning away from your ERs and your PRs towards the Petroleum Right? What would you need from government, just looking at the context of your current production right, Cohen? What would be essential to you to moving into your Petroleum Right phase? Because of course we recognize the government says, as Sibongile mentioned, there's a transitional period. We will allow you to either at renewal move over into this Petroleum Right, which will essentially house all of your terms from, if you're in production, all of your production terms, of course, exclusively, but if you're in exploration, and I imagine it would also govern Sibongile, like any exploration activities within a production area and so forth, because that often happens in our jurisdiction. So a very sort of holistic, complete document. Would you expect to see a copy and paste of what you currently have in terms of your contractual rights with government?
So that's another great question, Megan. So we almost the living example of how this actually works. Having gone from an ER to a PR, and then in the process, it's not called the retention permit, but when the Block 2A ER was converted to a PR, it was called the gas market development period. So there's a lot of experience, I think, in the regulator as to how to do this. It mustn't be as stated, I think, how important it is and what a good move it is that the exploration rights now have production right terms inbuilt into them. So that's a smooth transition over to the new regime. In terms of our right, it's pretty clear what that process is going to be. There'll be 5 years to get to convert the current petroleum right into a production right into a petroleum right. And we're quite comfortable with that process. We live, eat, breathe, sleep legislation, and making sure that all our rights are clear and we understand what we're doing. We have drill rigs turning right now, so that's important. When you have a significant investment on the line, that you're clear about tenure and you're clear about the rules. So we're quite happy with where we're at now.
Megan, you putting me on the spot there because we do not have a block as yet, but I can confidently say that we are in the final negotiation stages of acquiring an interest in one block. Hopefully that process will be concluded in the next few weeks. However, it was encouraging when Sibongile mentioned that the comments from the House of Traditional Leaders were expected mid-October. That then means that the bill is going to go forward more swiftly than one thought. One thought that probably it's still like an 18 months process to come, but it looks like Parliament is readying itself for the deliberations. Then in terms of our readiness as Imbokodo, it means one needs to go back into some of the negotiations that we currently having to make sure that we've covered all the potential new provisions that will be coming through from the bill. So it's the matter of tying up all those loose ends to make sure that we are ready for when new legislation come into place.
Thank you, Zakiri. I mean, one of the comments I have as well is that we have good bones in the upstream bill. There's still a bit of detail to come through. I think these are mainly administrative, and it might have been a bit better if we had those fiscal terms back to back, and the industry might have felt a little bit more comfortable from an investor perspective if we had them back to back. My views on that, and Sibongile, Kerwin, and Zakiri, please do jump in, is that the ultimately that's where we will end up. It might not have been where we started, but it seems to me, based on Sibongile's discussion here today, that is certainly where we will end up, with having the fiscal terms wrapped up by the Ministry of Finance under the right portfolio, as Amor mentioned, following the right governmental processes and protocols. It certainly might not have been a starting point, but it does seem to be an ending point. So yeah, we might not have started the game correctly, but I think we'll be ending it correctly, is my view. Happy to hear from you if you share that view to that question as well.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the industry has made, well, I would say informal inputs on the fiscal terms, because I mean, that has been under informal discussion for a very long time. So we do not expect many surprises. But if there are any surprises, that there is space for negotiation. I think it was Kerwin who mentioned in his presentation that at the end of the day, you want fair distribution of revenues, whether it's for the country itself, the operators, and the investors. So it's that balancing mechanism that one would expect in the fiscal terms.
Good. Then one of the last questions I have is, since we have a moratorium in place, with as South Africa not moved forward on much exploration activities, and the upstream bill has also caused a bit of a stall on us. Hi.
I'm not sure, Megan, if I'm losing you again, or
Oh no.
Zakiri. I'm not sure, but can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you have load shedding? This is why we need Ibobisi, and we need our gas projects to come online, isn't it? We can hear you, Sibongile. You might not be able to hear us. So the question was, since we have a moratorium in place and there hasn't been much exploration licenses or rights being awarded, and exploration has essentially stalled for the upstream bill, have we caused more harm than good by introducing the upstream bill? Cohen? Oh, since Zakiri took the last one.
So I know the drafters have been absolutely overwhelmed with the pace, because I mean, trying to get a piece of legislation through an entire government that involves the National Council of Provinces, our cabinet, and everything else that needs to happen. I mean, these things just take so much time, right? And I'm pretty sure Sibongile will say, no, this was actually pretty quick, and compared to other things, and she will be right, compared to other things. The reality, though, is really now's the time. We can't take the foot off the accelerator. We really need to get this done, right? We really need to get this done. Oil is at $80–85 a barrel. There's a transition happening right now. South Africa, we've missed a couple of cycles, commodity cycles, for a whole bunch of internal reasons, which has been extremely unfortunate. And I just feel that we can't miss another cycle. So I would say, get the bill done, enacted, get the fiscal terms and regulations in place, get the transformation provisions in place, so that this becomes the engine we know it can be. So that's the only thing I would say, is that the great job so far, but the work's not done. We actually to get it in place, and another 18 months is just too long.
We've just had one question come in at the moment. With the backdrop of the energy transition, time is becoming more and more precious, especially for IOCs. Is the new bill any consideration to shorten the approval processes? Example, Section 11 renewal, Section 11s or renewals. So I take it that means, are we looking at shortening those approval timelines? And then second part of that question is, what is the best estimate for the the Upstream Petroleum Resource Development Bill to be effective? So two questions. I think, Sibongile, I'll have you jump in on that. If we can hear you.
Thank you, Megan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, 100%.
So the president has called on government to shorten timeframes in terms of applications or anything that has to do with government. So I know that the department and the agency, we have been trying to respond to the president's call. Because the biggest issue in terms of timeframes, the delay is mostly the environmental authorization part of it. And to be honest, you also don't want to compromise the environment in the process of trying to shorten timeframes. So there are engagements between the department and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment to see if there is that possibility to shorten timeframes. But in terms of our timeframes, that is something that is being considered, because most of the timeframes will be done in terms of the regulation. So it's easier to also change certain timeframes as you go along, or even internally as you process, you try to, if the Act says you must do this within 70 days, if it's possible, you can shorten it to 40 days. So we are responding to the president's call to shorten the timeframes. So that part, I know that government is working on responding to the president's call. In terms of the timeframes in Parliament, unfortunately, I don't want to speak for Parliament because now the bill is in Parliament. It's a parliamentary process. Parliament has its own rules. It's guided by its own rules. It is completely in the hands of Parliament, but I know that Parliament is also aware that this bill is urgent. The minister has indicated that, and we're hoping that Parliament will process it as such. Of course, not shortcut processes, but follow processes to ensure that the bill can stand legal scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Sibongile. Just to follow up from me then on that, in terms of those timelines, would we see those, you mentioned perhaps in the regulations, or would they be in the guidelines that you issue, but they would be visible to the investor, would they?
Definitely, the timeframes will be visible. Remember, I think the principle that the department has adopted through it during all these years on the process of developing either its guideline, regulation, or a policy, or is that public consultation is very key. So you can't put something out there which impacts on a certain group or individuals and not consult those people. So it will be visible. They are going to be out there for everyone to see and comment on them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sibongile.
If I can just add to that.
Sure.
In terms of the timeframes, I agree with Sibongile completely that it will in all likelihood be transparent and easily accessible to the industry, because we see this in the Upstream bill with the Section 11 applications, where under the MPRDA there were no prescribed time periods, and under the bill currently the minister and the agency is given 90 days, if I'm not mistaken, to finalize a Section 11 application. So I do think that Parliament is adhering to the President's request.
Well, at least the drafting committee is definitely looking.
The drafting committee, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that we've covered that question quite eloquently.
Can I add a suggestion, Megan?
Yes, please.
So if PASA and the DMRE had like suggestion boxes, so this would be my suggestion in the suggestion box, right? So number one,
Get a suggestion box.
suggestion box. But it would be half the size of the application approval department and double the size of the policing and audit department. So net you have the same number of people, you just shift them to another department. So these guys are approving quickly, and these guys are taking time to study compliance and police those rights, so that the guys that actually do a proper job, they just get on with it quickly. And those guys that are skimping, they're facing the full might of the law, so that not everybody gets caught up in that process. That's my suggestion. How's that?
Your suggestion is noted, Cohen. We will take it forward.
Thank you, Cohen. I'll Zakiri and Cohen and Sibongile and more closing remarks on your end before we reach the end of our session. Zakiri, you're on mute.
Sorry, Chair. I think for me, it's an issue that I am sure all of us in this webinar are passionate about, and that of skills development, local content, in that it would be a shame if the industry is not ready to have local people participating in the industry. I'm not going to shift blame to anyone. I think us as the industry, the government, have got to drive skills development and let all of us be ready in that when operations start, we have young people that have been well trained on environmental management and all aspects of oil and gas. I mean, Kevin is talking about the auditing side and the reviewers. We just need to be ready. I think that we have long passed the phase where we say, oh, we do not have skills. We don't have people that have been well trained. I think we have a huge responsibility to make sure that the industry is ready. And again, no need to press the restart button. A lot of work was put in during Pagisa in terms of what skill set do we need. It's a matter of going back there and polish up that paper and let's get our young people ready to support the industry, because that will ensure that there is that acceptability of our operations, and you won't find young people saying, oh, that industry is for old people, we are not participating. Let's make sure that the industry is as inclusive as possible. And thank you very much for having me, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Zakiri. Thank you so much. Sibongile, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. I think from the agency perspective, I don't want to speak for the department, but I will say this, that, we believe that, the bill is, it's not perfect, because maybe there are still certain concerns that are being raised by the industry, but we are excited. We believe that it balances the needs of investor, it balances the needs of our Black persons, it balances the need of our communities in terms of ensuring that benefits also flow to the people of this country. And we hope that we believe that government has come to party here in terms of this bill, and we are hoping that the industry will also do the same, also come to party, and also do their share in terms of ensuring that they support government's view or vision, where in terms of where we want to see the petroleum industry going, because to be honest, it's for the benefit of everyone. Investors will benefit, the people of this country will benefit. So it's a win-win situation really, if we all come to party and work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sibongile. Amor, over to you.
Yeah, Megan, I echo what Sibongile has just said, and from a legal perspective, I mean, from the first iteration of the bill in 2019 to what we've seen when the bill was, when the second iteration was published in 2021, there's definitely an attempt to take into account the considerations and concerns by the industry. So, I mean, we're excited about the process and excited to see what the new iteration will say.
Thank you so much, Amor. And then concluding with you, Kerwin, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. So Zakiri took the words out of my mouth about the skills and local content, local participation. That's I think that's going to be profoundly important and can't be a missed opportunity. Just building on what Spongile said, you know, I would love to see a much closer collaboration between government, regulator, and industry. You know, I've been to so many regional offices in the DMRE on the mining side. And watch the poor regional manager literally swamped, drowning in applications, Section 11s, mining right, production, you know, PRs. It's just overwhelming at times. And there's such good people working so hard, but it's so much, right? So I think there can be a much closer collaboration, whether it would be with human resources, technology, training and development, some sort of support where it's not felt as though the industry is trying to do the job of the regulator, but really the industry is trying to support and assist. And if we can, you know, find each other there, I think we can make all of this work so much better for everybody, you know. So that'd be my parting comment. Thank you so much for the platform.
Thank you so much, Kerwin. I'd like to actually thank all of our panelists, Sibongile, Amor, Zakiri, Kerwin. Thank you for sharing your invaluable insights today, taking the time out of your days to share them with us. And as we gear towards this new era for the sector, may we continue to engage so robustly, openly, honestly. And I can only repeat what we've all said. Ultimately, if we work toward the achievement of a balanced piece of legislation, one which ensures that South Africans and all categories of investors derive sustainable benefits, then we certainly are on the right path. I'd like to thank all of our attendees as well for joining us today and engaging with us on the panel. And just a reminder that the next CDH webinar will be hosted by our agricultural sector, quite an interesting one. That's coming up this Thursday at 9 a.m., where our panel of legal and industry experts will explore the cannabis regulatory framework in South Africa. So one to watch out for. It certainly has been my pleasure to host you today. And thanks once again to this panel. And we look forward to our next sessions in our next webinar sessions in the oil and gas sector. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.